Olá, está começando o Futuro Vem do Futuro, o nosso podcast da MIT Sloan Management Review Brasil, que hoje vocês estão vendo que está num cenário bastante diferente e lindo, por sinal. A gente está aqui no AI Showcase gravando para vocês, que foi um evento que aconteceu hoje de manhã aqui na Casa Jardine, em São Paulo, um evento sobre IA e muitas coisas para contar. Vocês vão ver também aqui na nossa review, no nosso portal de MIT Sloan Review. Vocês vão gostar também. E hoje a gente vai falar sobre isso com o nosso super convidado. E para adiantar, eu já digo que eu sou bem feliz com o futuro que nos espera hoje neste episódio, né, Dri?
É isso mesmo. É um futuro que se refere, de um lado, à transição energética, né, a definir a continuação da vida no planeta Terra, e, de outro, a inteligência artificial, como o nome diz, AI, né? São os dois eixos que a gente tem para pensar, talvez mais importantes nesse futuro emergente. Eu sei que um monte de gente vai dizer que tem outras coisas importantes, mas eu vou focar nesses dois porque esses são interferem realmente nos negócios. Eu sou a Adriana Salles Gomes, diretora editorial da MIT SMR no Brasil, e até brinquei com o nosso convidado e nosso keynote speaker do AI Showcase, que veio diretamente da MIT SMR mãe, como nós a chamamos, que ele é uma pessoa no lugar certo e na hora certa, e vocês vão entender por quê.
E diferente das nossas gravações online, hoje o nosso convidado está aqui na minha frente, do lado da Adri. A gente tem aqui com a gente o Sam Ransbotham, nosso convidado de honra. Hello, Sam. Nice to meet you.
Obrigado. Thank you for having me today. It's exciting to be here.
The obrigado is excellent pronunciation.
Yes, well, that's what a little bit of Duolingo will do for you.
O Sam está aprendendo um pouco de português aqui, mas uma explicação para vocês. Esse é o primeiro episódio bilíngue que a gente vai fazer. Nós vamos perguntar em português para o Sam e o Sam vai responder em inglês. E aí, para facilitar aqui a nossa mecânica desse episódio, a fala do Sam vai estar traduzida e vai ter legenda.
Eu vou apresentar rapidamente o Sam aqui, ele vai se apresentar, vocês sabem, na primeira pergunta a gente pede para cada entrevistado se apresentar, mas eu não poderia deixar de dizer que isso é um meeting of podcasters, porque o Sam é um grande podcaster, ele é responsável por um podcast especializado em IA corporativa. Ele é professor de Analytics do Boston College, editor especial de inteligência artificial na MIT SMR Mãe, na nossa revista Mãe. Tem doutorado pela Georgia Tech, já fundou uma empresa de software e trabalha com a Agência Internacional de Energia Atômica ligada à ONU. E ele vai explicar tudo isso. E, como a Lara falou, ele está aprendendo português. Olha a pressão, olha a pressão. Mas vocês viram que ele entendeu, né? E então ele comanda, é um co-host do podcast Me, Myself and AI, um nome genial, que já está na sua 9ª temporada, são 90 episódios, mais de 90 episódios, já passou disso. Eu tinha feito o cálculo de 900, mas são 90. E, enfim, nós vamos fazer uma playlist best of do MMAI para os íntimos.
E se vocês ainda não ouviram, escutem, porque vale muito, muito a pena. Para a gente começar, uma primeira pergunta aqui para o Sam. Sam, a gente quer conhecer um pouco mais sobre você, como você se tornou professor, como você se tornou editor convidado também da MIT Sloan Review e porque também você trabalha com um podcast, né? Porque você virou podcaster também.
E como jogador de futebol também, se você quiser falar.
Oh, that has already gotten way too exaggerated just from the brief introduction. It's a long and sordid tale of woe, but it's pretty exciting. I first got interested in the use of data in my dissertation. I started my dissertation working on information security. And with information security, we have billions and billions of records, and some of them are bad guys trying to get in. How do you differentiate all the good traffic from the bad traffic? And so that was my dissertation. But that got me interested in how we use data in general. And that, it turns out, is a skill that transcends just information security and goes to everywhere. So we started about a decade ago at Sloan Management Review trying to understand how companies are using data. And of course, that evolved into how companies are using artificial intelligence. And the pandemic helped us in some ways because we were doing interviews with people about artificial intelligence, and we thought, these are already being recorded for our research. Why not share them? Because it really bothered us to record half an hour of talk with someone, they say all kinds of interesting things, but I could only use one or two sentences in my report. And so our reports, we thought, hey, let's just record them all and maybe people can learn from the overall episode. So that's a quick and brief history. And I'm ignoring your football comment, by the way.
And what about the soccer?
Yes. They're making fun of me because it is technically true that I was paid to play soccer in Europe. But the reality is that I'm an absolutely terrible soccer player. I'm truly terrible.
I don't believe that. Eu vou só acrescentar aqui o papel do Sam de founder. You founded a software company. Tell us
Yeah.
about that.
So I have a degree in chemical engineering, and what I figured out was that I really didn't want to do chemical engineering. And so I went back to school immediately and I got an MBA, but I didn't want to necessarily start right away. And so I'd already gone back to school. So if you've gone back to school, what do you do after that? Well, we started a software company, and that lasted for more than a decade of doing all kinds of interesting projects from all kinds of different parts of the world and different organizations. And it was a great time to be in software. But you need change every now and then. And so about 15 years ago, I switched over and went back to school again and got a PhD. And then now I'm teaching at Boston College.
Wonderful. Ok. Bom, o Sam, a gente costuma aqui dizer no Brasil que quando alguém se envolve muito prematuramente ou pioneiramente com algum assunto, se envolveu com esse assunto quando era mato, né? Então, o Sam se envolveu com Data Analytics quando era mato. E além de explorar as histórias de como as empresas têm utilizado a inteligência artificial, ele tem conduzido pesquisas importantes sobre o uso e a cultura da IA no ambiente corporativo. Então, antes de entrarmos, de falarmos do Me, Myself and AI propriamente, eu vou te pedir para comparar a evolução desde que você chegou no Analytics até agora.
Well, that's a long history. But I think it's really fascinating to think what we can learn from each other. And, there's so many skills out there with people using data and understanding data. I started, as I mentioned, from information security, and I understood about using data, and I realized those techniques could go beyond that. Well, then we also realized that so many people are using data in so many different ways, and it would be really interesting to share what stories how they were using things, and honestly, how they were struggling, because it's really interesting to learn how people are having trouble. And so when they have trouble, then maybe we can learn from that and not all make the same mistakes. So that's the quick history.
Sam, na edição 25 da Review, que é a nossa revista digital da MIT SMR aqui no Brasil, a gente publicou a sua pesquisa, research, sobre inteligência artificial e cultura organizacional, como uma precisa estar relacionada à outra, como a cultura organizacional ela sustenta a adoção da IA. Você tem avançado nesse estudo também, né? O que você pode contar para a gente, o que evoluiu do tempo em que você fez essa pesquisa para cá? Que dados você traz novos?
So I think that's pretty fascinating. I think the first tendency is for us to look at systems like artificial intelligence and think about how can they make something faster, or how can they make money or save money. I'm not saying faster is bad. I'm not saying that money is bad. Not at all. But we got interested in some of these more, let's say, systemic effects, and some of the effects that are not these first order effects, but the second order effects. And in particular, like you mentioned, the cultural effects. There's a lot of fear about artificial intelligence out there in the world, and it's going to come in and take our jobs. It's going to overwhelm us. It's going to create doomsdays. But that's not exactly what we found when we talk to people working. When we talk to people working, 60% of the people we talk to think that AI is a coworker. We asked people if they were afraid of AI taking parts of their jobs. Only 33% mentioned that. But we asked if people hoped that AI would take part of their jobs. 73% said they hoped that AI would take. So the point here is that when we make a change like this in an organization, when we introduce technologies, it goes beyond just the technology itself. And so when people use the technology, they they observe that they get better performance in some way. So performance gets better. Performance gets better. People like that. When people like that, it improves things. When people improve, they want to do more of whatever it was that improved it. So they adopt more artificial intelligence. And so it becomes a cycle where using it improves effectiveness, which improves the culture.
Was this the main discovery between the first and the second round of your research?
Yeah, so it is true that I think that in the early rounds of research, we tended to focus, like many people do, on these improvements that we might expect. Because if we could go back to the dark ages of artificial intelligence 4 or 5 years ago, we weren't sure how these things would work. But once we started to see some benefits, we also started to wonder about these other effects. And I think that's really gotten a little more interesting for me too, as we start to think about how it affects and interrelates with us as people.
Eu vou pedir agora para você dividir conosco, para o público que não esteve no AI Showcase. Nós ainda estamos no AI Showcase nesse exato momento, mas quem não acabou não podendo vir, quais foram os principais pontos da sua palestra que foi muito elogiada. I remember that you said that only 11% of companies manage to have profits or to get
Significant
value.
value.
Yeah,
Mhm.
significant value.
Yeah, and that's a significance important because people are getting value, but it may be small or incremental. The 11% were people that were getting really a high level or a sort of organization changing level of value.
Give us the highlights, other highlights.
Yeah, so we've got about an hour now. Let me just go ahead and give you everything. No, I tried to make 6 points today, and you never should make 6 points. You can only get 2 or 3 for people to remember, but we tried. But one of the main messages is that I think there's a lot of hype about artificial intelligence right now. People are crazy about it. People are also anti it. They're saying, "Oh, there's too much hype. What's real?" And so one of the things that we tried to bring to today was an understanding of what people are actually doing. And when I say people, I mean organizations, and I mean real organizations. We tend to idolize tech giants, these huge technological companies that can do things that maybe, let's say, normal companies can't. We really focus on, to talk today, I tried to use examples of what I would think of as normal companies, people who are not technological wizards necessary, but they're still getting value from this. And so that was a big thing. Another point was that artificial intelligence has become pervasive. We're using it in ways that we never expected. And from this podcast, which I'm sure will get cleaned up with using artificial intelligence tools, these are all small and incremental improvements. These incremental improvements can really add up to value. But it's kind of tricky because we're suspicious that it couldn't really be artificial intelligence. Like, if we can use this, if it's on our phone, if it's on our apps, that couldn't be really artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence has to be some complicated thing that no one can do. But that's always true until we can do it, and then it becomes normal. And it's amazing how quickly crazy has become normal. Anyway.
2 points. And
Two, oh
the other
gosh.
The
4.
third. We are waiting.
You're going to quiz me on all my points here. So I guess one of the things we really wanted to think about was how this might be a general purpose technology and how it might affect many, many organizations in fundamental ways, much like you've discussed in your magazine with electricity and steam engines and these sorts of, I'll put transistor in there because I think transistor is important. But these technologies that are pervasive and they go across many industries. And so, today we talked a little bit about the pros and the cons of that sort of approach and whether or not it made sense. In terms of other points we tried to make, one was around the concerns. And there are some very deep concerns around artificial intelligence. One is around job loss. I'm not particularly concerned about that at the moment in terms of human being replaced by machine directly. But there's a lot of other things to worry about in terms of, go ahead.
But define in the moment, at the moment, what is this moment? How long is this moment?
These moments are very, very fast these days. That's one of the things that's so challenging. is this technology is changing so rapidly, and in theory, I'm teaching a class on this, and it's tough to. I always have to check right before class to see if there's any news that means that the class is irrelevant now suddenly. But yeah, so in these times, I think means technologies don't change hugely rapidly, but I think in the next 3 or 5 years, we're thinking about how these changes might affect. As more and more tasks get done by machines, what does that mean for jobs? And I think the short-term thing that it means is that people are not going to lose their job to a machine. People are going to lose their jobs to other people using technology better. And so it's not the machine you have to worry about. It's more the human using the machine well to worry about. And the second thing is your organization. If your organization is not using these tools, some other organization is, and your entire organization might be at risk. And so those are the things we worry about. And, I've got other concerns here, but I think they'll come up later when we talk.
Agora a gente vai falar sobre o podcast Me, Myself and I, em que o Sam traz uma série de cases práticos de empresas que às vezes estão ao nosso alcance, às vezes estão um pouquinho mais distantes de nós. Por exemplo, a NASA. O Sam entrevistou a Van Verma, em que ela falou sobre o projeto Perseverance Rover. Então eu queria que o Sam contasse para a gente como que isso pode ser útil para a vida real, aqui para as nossas empresas do dia a dia.
Well, so first, I think that NASA story is fascinating. If you think about, we as humans are driving a craft on another planet using largely artificial intelligence. 88% of their driving is done autonomously. I think that's pretty fascinating. Actually, when we were recording the podcast with NASA, I actually wanted my kids to come and see these people who were doing this. I mean, these are people who are actually doing this.
Real people.
Real humans that are not that different than us. I mean, they're smart, but they wear clothes, they eat, it's not some mythical organization, it's real people. And that's, again, part of the podcast. Me, Myself, and AI is really about the stories of people. But I think, as you mentioned, most companies are not running rovers on Mars. I mean, it is not a common task. And so it'd be easy to discount that. But I think that would be, short-sighted. There are lots that we can learn from what they're doing on Mars that normal companies can do today. For example, you set me up for that. One, they do a ton of simulation. They're not a couple of spare Marses sitting around for them to practice on. They've got to simulate Mars, and they have to simulate it well before they get there, because it's a pain if they get there and find it doesn't work. We can use an amazing amount of artificial intelligence tools to help us with simulation. And I think that's a tool, that's something that any corporation can use, not just NASA. And the second thing is around knowledge. And that's going to seem a little tricky, but just this week in the news, NASA made a discovery of an interesting rock on Mars. I don't know if you've seen pictures of Mars. There are lots of rocks, and they all look pretty similar to me. And so when they're exploring the planet, they can go quickly and explore a lot of the planet, but they might miss an interesting rock. If they go slowly, well, they can see all the rocks in detail, but they don't get much of the planet explored. Artificial intelligence has helped with that, because finding a rock that is interesting is part of their algorithm that they're using. It'll drive fast until it sees something that is interesting. But knowledge is difficult. You could tell me what's interesting, I could tell you what's interesting, but interesting is very difficult to quantify. Like, how do you put interesting in an algorithm? And I think that's one of the huge challenges that they face, and again, that other people can learn from.
Segundo episódio que você selecionou, Sam, foi com o economista prêmio Nobel Paul Romer, sobre todo o hype, né? Ele falou sobre todo o hype em torno da IA. E essa semana, IA ou AI, né? Aqui no evento, metade falava IA, metade falava AI. Bom, e essa semana eu e a Lara fomos ver o economista Noriel Robini, que é conhecido como Doutor Apocalipse, que previu a crise hipotecária de 2008. Em geral, ele continua muito pessimista, vendo um cenário de estagflação, possíveis guerras, etc. Mas ele disse, para minha surpresa pelo menos, ver na tecnologia, se usada para o bem e com muito investimento em educação, a grande tábua de salvação. Por que eu trouxe o Robini? O Robini nem é prêmio Nobel, mas porque o Paul Romer, que é prêmio Nobel, falou para o Sam da importância da educação. E aí eu queria saber do papel das empresas, eu queria que você falasse um pouco desse podcast e contasse para a gente o papel das empresas em relação à educação.
So certainly doomsday type scenarios make a lot of sense. There's a lot of logical points in there, and I think that we'd be wise to pay attention to those. Now, I don't think though that we can be completely doomsdayish, and I think that was part of what Paul Romer brought out, was that there are lots of positives. If you think about right now, very few people in the world understand how to program and how to use computers well. I mean, people can use apps, but they don't understand what's happening behind them necessarily. And I think it's important for the next coming years for people to get more and more aware of how these things work. And that's exactly what Paul is focusing on. How do we educate the next group of people to understand these technologies better so that they can use the technologies better? Technologies are just tools. And we talked today that you can pick up a rock and you can hit someone with it, or you can build something with it. The rock doesn't know the difference. So it depends on how we as humans use these tools. And I think that's what Paul got me excited about, was how we can change our coming education system to think about taking advantage of the tools and the availability.
Continuando nessa esteira da conversa sobre IA e educação e como essa relação pode ser prolífera, eu gostaria que você falasse um pouquinho sobre o Zen Jilani, que é um paquistanês que estudou chinês, um personagem muito interessante que você trouxe para o Me, Myself and I, e ele fala muito sobre como ele usa a IA no Duolingo para reter clientes e também a satisfação desses clientes, né? Que se isso não for bem feito, a gente perde, ele simplesmente perde esse cliente. Então ele investe muito nisso com o IA. Conta um pouquinho para a gente sobre esse personagem e como que ele vem usando a IA na educação por meio do Duolingo.
That's huge. We've spent so much time thinking about how we can teach machines to do something. So machine learning is about the machine learning to do something for us. And what truly excited me about Zan and their story is the goal of this tool is not for the machine to translate. It's for us as humans to get better. Maybe if you're an instructor like me and you have class every semester, you may teach 100, 200 students a year. You may have a 20-year career. Maybe you talk to 5,000 people. You have an influence on 5,000 people. And you have a trouble learning, I think, how to teach. You know, maybe there's a joke in education that I attribute to Jerry Kane, was somebody I used to teach with, which was the first time you teach, no one learns anything. The second time you teach, the instructor learns something. And the third time, the students learn something. I don't know if that's true or not. I like the phrasing of it. But the point here is that Duolingo is in a situation where they're trying to help people learn something. Again, the goal is not to translate. The goal is to help you understand something better. I think that there's an amazing world of opportunity, because not 5,000 people, but Duolingo observes 500 million people learning. We've got to get better at teaching through that much observation. And if we can use our time better as humans to learn faster, that is absolutely huge. And Duolingo is a great example of that.
He talks also about motivating those people with AI.
Yep. So, yeah, there's many layers to that story there. It's a fascinating story. But yes, there's lots about AI to teach. There's artificial intelligence virtual reality scenarios where you can have immersive conversations. And I'm not trying to plug this product necessarily. I don't get any royalties. I use a free version like everyone else. But the point is that we can use these tools, and we use artificial intelligence at a higher level to learn lots of different things, not just that particular thing. There's a world of personalized learning that I think, if you think about the valuable resources that humans and time are, it addresses both of those things. I'm excited about that.
Todo mundo tem que ouvir esse episódio. Todos que a gente está falando aqui, né? Bom, tivemos algumas discussões animadas no conselho editorial da MIT SMR, our editorial board, recentemente, quando o CEO da Energia, o Huang, diz que com a inteligência artificial daqui a pouco não precisaremos mais de desenvolvedores. Só para não fazer suspense, eu vou dizer que os nossos conselheiros acharam isso uma bobagem, mas acham que o desenvolvedor vai ter que ser muito mais sênior do que é hoje. Os desenvolvedores júniores perdem espaço e ganham espaço uma espécie de desenvolvedor PhD. Então eu queria te ouvir como PhD que você é sobre isso. Queria que nos contasse da conversa com o Mário Rodrigues, do GitHub, que lida com esse mundo de desenvolvedores. Teremos desenvolvedores, eles acabarão. Curiosidade, o título do episódio é Se 10% das pessoas do mundo fossem desenvolvedores.
Most of the world is not aware of how most of these computers work, and that's okay. I mean, not everyone has to know everything. Everyone has a different specialization. But if you think about how programming has changed in the last 20, 30 years, it's changed rapidly. And this is going to be another change. It's not going to, I think, eliminate programming at all. In fact, I think it calls out the importance of what I'm going to call algorithmic thinking. That's a phrase that we throw around. I didn't invent that. Don't attribute that to me. But it's not so much about necessarily the coding steps, but thinking about how an algorithm works and how logical statements work. This will transcend one particular programming language or one particular coding application. If, Marius was saying that, if 10% of the world were programmers, I mean, I think that number now is probably, 1%. And that's okay. We don't all need to be programmers. In fact, I kind of push back on that because machines will be able to do a lot of this. But I think we have some real questions about how we get better as humans at developing computer programs. If we're using these tools to get head starts, it's not clear that a student who uses a tool to get halfway towards their programming assignment has the skills to go beyond that halfway. It may be a race to an average programmer when we don't want average, we want excellence. And I think that's some of the opportunity that all these tools are grappling with right now is how do we help people avoid the tedium, but also help them learn so they become critical algorithmic thinkers. That's really important. And it's true in coding and it's true of many other things, essay writing and others.
So this is the PhD people in programming. Okay.
Well, no, see, I think, okay, I'm going to push back on that because I don't think, PhD is a long and, unpleasant process in many cases. Maybe there's room for a different educational model. I think we ought to be open to that.
Agora eu vou perguntar para o Sam sobre um outro assunto que interessa bastante também a Adriana, porque a filha dela estuda cinema, e é sobre um episódio em que o Sam entrevistou um ator para falar de inteligência artificial, o Ty Sheridan. Esse Ty Sheridan, esse ator, ele empreendeu uma startup de IA para efeitos especiais, que inclui uma plataforma onde se sobe um arquivo 2D de animação e ele sai 3D. O que mais te chamou a atenção, Sam, nessa entrevista e como essas possibilidades da IA para creators conversa com o mundo corporativo?
So I have to admit, we had Ty on the episode out of selfish reasons and actual reasons for our listeners. The selfish reason is that I've always been a huge fan of the Ernest Cline book, Ready Player One. And then there was the movie, Ready Player One, made from the book, and Ty Sheridan was the star of that. And so I got really interested in what Ty was working on. And so we started looking at it, and as you mentioned, he's got a company that's helping make 2D models turn into 3D models. And if you are a big budget Hollywood production, it's okay. You can hire hundreds and thousands even of technologists to help you make those transitions and make those virtual CGI worlds and things. But most of us aren't like that. And so what Ty is excited about is making these tools accessible to everybody, not just the rich studios. And so within that story about Ready Player One, which is cool, but also about this technology company, there's a story about these tools that are getting technologies accessible to us, all of us. You don't have to be you don't have to study film, for example, in your example. You don't have to be a film student necessarily to be able to use these tools. Now, they're not going to ever be as good as a big budget thriller. but they're going to be pretty good, and they can reach out for an underserved mass who could never get access to those tools, get more people interested in making tools. Maybe then the big budget comes in and helps clean them up. But there's a fascinating story here about how these technologies can make tools and make techniques available to people that were never there before. And I think that's what's fascinating.
And also for corporate purpose.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many things that corporations are either, there are technology barriers or cost barriers to do that are rapidly eroding. And now that doesn't mean that all the job disappears. It means that the jobs change. And I think that's what we're all struggling to figure out is, as the technology shifts, how do the jobs shift to compensate? But it's true all over, even if you're not making movies. It's true everywhere, I think.
All right. Eu também tenho selfish reasons aqui, razões egoístas. Vou citar minha filha de novo, a Alice, que além de estudar cinema é baterista e já teve uma banda de punk rock. E o Sam entrevistou o Mark Suman, que se definia como um garoto do punk rock em defesa do pacifismo lá nos anos 80. E hoje está na Fundação Mozilla e a conversa girou em torno da IA responsável, né? Responsible AI. Um dos nossos conselheiros editoriais, o Fábio Steibel, já escreveu para a gente na nossa publicação na MIT SMR Brasil sobre como ele acha que o Brasil, de alguma maneira, já perdeu o bonde da IA, de uma maneira geral, mas da IA aberta, da inteligência artificial aberta, como nós temos muitos casos interessantes aqui no Brasil, ainda dá tempo. Então, eu queria ouvir o Sam sobre isso, sobre a inteligência artificial aberta e sobre as reflexões que essa entrevista com Mark Suman provocou.
Well, as much as I would like to say that it's because of the punk rock beginning, I didn't know that until we talked to him and found out his fascinating story. He's a super interesting person, and the excitement around what Mozilla is doing, to maybe broaden this a bit. They're working in an open context, and they're trying to provide open models for using artificial intelligence. One of the concerns I think that's valid is that so many corporations are using these tools and creating these tools, and we have very little insight into how they're using them and what they're using and how they're doing them. The Mozilla and Mark Surman, they're about trying to create alternative open tools that, even if they're not hugely successful, will have some market pressures to help encourage some openness. Openness really helps. If you think about, actually, one of the examples that I gave earlier today in the talk was that the food industry in America was very dirty and unclean a century ago. And then this Upton Sinclair wrote a book called The Jungle in 1906, and it was about how dirty that industry was and how unhealthy it was. Because of that, a lot of attention got placed on the industry. A lot of oversight came in, and we can eat food now without worrying that it's going to make us sick. For the most part, I mean, there's occasional problems, of course, but we can rely on the supply chain that gets us that infrastructure. But it only is true because we have insight into what's happening and we have transparency. Now, if you compare that to the way that most models are working now with artificial intelligence, there's just not a lot of transparency. And if you go to buy stock in a company, you would like a CPA to go in and look at that company. You don't have to see the books, but you can trust that the CPA has. We don't know that a nuclear facility is making bombs or making power, but we have inspectors who go in and can assess those things. So the point is that we have models in society that help with understanding what's going on behind the scenes. And I think Mark and Mozilla are really at the forefront of thinking about how we provide that trust and assurance throughout the process. I mean, he's got a fascinating story, but again, there's a bigger story behind that too.
Is it about ecosystem?
Yeah, so ecosystem's a huge part of that because of to make the food analogy, one company produces something, another company uses it, another company uses it. It's all in a supply chain. We have a supply chain of information that is equally interesting or more important now. Where does this information come from? What is the provenance of the information? Under what context was it collected? The further and further people get removed from data, the less they understand about what its limitations are. All data has limitations. And getting transparency around that is big. And I think that's part of the overall openness movement.
Agora, falando sobre as Big Techs, que foi um tema também que o Sam trouxe para o Me, Myself and I, eu queria aproveitar e te pedir para você comentar um pouco, Sam, sobre a entrevista com uma grande executiva de Big Tech, a Joelle Pineau, da Meta, que foi entrevistada agora no episódio 908, o mais recente, né? Ela tem uma visão de pesquisa aberta, que é bem interessante também. Então, eu queria saber sobre o que você acha dessa visão dela, né, sobre as Big Techs, e a questão a caminho, das que estão a caminho, né, como a OpenAI, no contexto em que vivemos.
I know I said that we didn't really focus on tech companies as much, but we couldn't help but talk to Meta about some of the things that they're doing. Because if you think about, they seem to be very committed to openness. And I think that's important because if you think about, just back up to something like the HPFS, the high performance file system, was done by companies and released for us all to use. The MapReduce constructs, those were done within companies and then released to all of us to use. And so there are some good stories about big tech offering things that we then can all take advantage of. And so those are huge. Joelle was talking about those things. It's really fascinating in the commitment that they have towards doing that. But at the same time, it also gave us a chance to think a little bit about how fundamental innovation research is changing. There's some recent study in Science that came out, and it was talking about how most innovation used to come out of universities and basic science, and now it's increasingly coming out of technology companies. And part of it is resources. I mean, these technologies are expensive. This data is expensive, and so it's hard to recreate that in a university situation. And so then we're relying on technology companies to produce these. Now, they may intend to behave well, but it may not always work out that way. And, so far, I think we've had mostly good stories, but you do wonder about what happens when OpenAI is OpenAI, but has a lot of funding from corporate people who are going to want to have a return on investment. And I think that's a fascinating.
And how does it work in companies like OpenAI?
Yeah, so I think we're all learning how that works. I think it's not like they have a playbook that works perfectly. They're following a perfect script. I think they're learning just like us about how to manage normal, rational economic interests that are perfectly legitimate to have with, a technology that has really, in the last 500 days, taken over a whole lot of attention. I would do talks with CEOs, CIOs, and I would ask them how many people have ever used a machine learning model, how many people have ever downloaded Python and built a model. Very few of those people have ever built a model themselves. You ask that same question now about how many people have gone to ChatGPT or used an OpenAI tool or a DALL-E tool, I'm not trying to focus on them. There's lots of Claude and Copilot. Almost all of them have played with these technologies. And that's a really fascinating shift over the last, let's say, year and a half or 2 years.
But are you interviewing Sam Altman someday?
We'll see. I am certainly open to it, of course. I mean, I'm very
If he
curious.
asks.
If he asks, we would certainly accept, I think.
Ok. Eu vou pivotar um pouco a conversa agora para falar do trabalho que a gente já citou com a Agência de Energia Atômica que o Sam faz, que é outro eixo aí do futuro, o eixo da transição energética muito importante. A gente recentemente trouxe aqui no Futuro Vem do Futuro, o Carlos de Matias Martins falando que usinas nucleares, né, na transição energética para a economia de baixo carbono são muito importantes, se não as mais importantes formas de energia aqui. Então eu queria ouvir do Sam, que está acompanhando tudo isso de perto, se é mais uma prova de que ele é a pessoa certa no lugar certo.
Well, I'm not sure. It's always difficult to say you're an expert in AI because it's changing so quickly, and I have trouble with that. I definitely have trouble thinking about myself as a nuclear expert. My father-in-law would probably be very angry. He is a nuclear expert. But I do think it's interesting that we have increasing energy demands, and again, you mentioned earlier that I do have a background of working with the Atomic Energy Agency, and I think that's a technology that is up, that I'm hopeful can really help us in this. And I recognize some of the problems. I agree with some of the concerns, but our worldwide demands for energy are very high, and relying on carbon seems short-sighted. So we've got to come up with something else, and that seems like a good option to me. But again, yeah, I'm more on artificial intelligence than I am
Ok.
on nuclear.
Sam, a gente também quer saber um pouco sobre a sua experiência na ONU, né? Que os nossos conselheiros entendem que deveria ser um sistema operacional do mundo, mas que até nesse momento não está conseguindo cumprir esse papel. Como você vê isso da perspectiva de quem esteve dentro?
So I think what you're referring to is that before I was an academic, I had a software company, and our software company did a lot of work with the United Nations, particularly the Atomic Energy Agency, and I believe in that mission. I think that the idea that we can all work together and try to solve some of these problems is big. And it's an idea that will largely not work in many ways, but that doesn't mean that it's not better for trying. We can point to lots of problems and lots of difficulties and failures, and that doesn't mean that they're not true, but it also doesn't necessarily mean that the world's not better for all of us having worked together and tried. And and I point to the Atomic Energy Agency in particular. They have a dual mission of helping people with nuclear facilities safely, so that we can all learn from each other. We don't want to all individually make mistakes in that domain, but at the same time, trying to prevent weaponized uses. And for all the difficulties and criticisms of the United Nations and some of the things that they've done or not able to do, we have not had a significant nuclear weapon attack. And I'm nervous saying that because I don't know. I don't want something to happen because of me counting on it. But from 1945 until now, we've largely avoided that. And the analogy with artificial intelligence is that we have invented this technology, which is extremely powerful. That powerful technology can work for good and bad, just like nuclear can work for good or bad. And a lot depends on how we as humans use these technologies. And, maybe to, step back and think about all the giant message here is that we as humans have a huge amount of choice in how we use technologies, whether it's nuclear or whether it's artificial intelligence. And the UN model has achieved that in some ways. And so, I think that there's a lot of positives that we can get from working together. And, the idea that just because we can point to cases that it doesn't work together doesn't mean that we throw out everything with a few failures.
I think it's fascinating. You did check many things as a founder, a professor, a UN employee, or working for the United Nations. And so everything
He is
almost,
the
a
right person in
consultant,
the right
a
place.
podcaster, yeah, everything.
I
This
would
is-
like to tell you that it's all because of my, strategic genius, but I think we cannot discount the massive role of luck and opportunity in that. So.
This is the reason why you are not luck in sports, because you
Exactly.
are all your luck is in everything else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I used up all my luck in a different
Yeah.
area.
Estamos chegando ao final do episódio e a gente vai fazer, agora quem nos acompanha no podcast sabe que a gente sempre faz isso, que é um questionário Proust, que é adaptado para os nossos entrevistados, para entender, para fazê-los se revelar de maneiras indiretas pelas preferências deles. Então, vamos começar. Um livro.
The moment I'm pretty fascinated by the book, The Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Not that I'm interested in motorcycles at all, but it's an older book from the 70s written by Robert Pirsig, and it talks about our relationship with technology, how much we need to understand the technology, how much we need to be users of the technology, and what are the pros and the cons of that. I find it fascinating because it was written long before our modern technologies and written in the context of a motorcycle, but it's a fascinating analogy to think about how we use, how we understand, how we learn about new technologies. I think it's fun.
Interesting. Um filme ou uma série de TV, de streaming?
So it's very funny that you asked me that, because irrespective of this event and all this, my favorite movie of all time is Brazil, which is actually has very little to do with Brazil.
Yeah.
But ironically, it was showing on the plane as I came here, and I got to watch it again. So it's a 1985-ish. It's an interesting, slightly dystopian view of the world,
Yeah.
but still very fascinating. And I think it's particularly ironic that it just came up on the flight and I was able to see it again. And the protagonist of the story is named Sam, so I think that must be
Oh, what a coincidence.
another reason.
Wonderful. Game.
So at the moment, I'm not so much playing games as I'm fascinated by the game of chess. I'm not particularly a good chess player, but we've been studying how people play chess, and we've been studying how people use artificial intelligence to learn to get better at chess. And I think it's a great microcosm to observe how humans learn to do a task and improve at a task in different ways, because it matters if you're a beginner, if it matters if you're an expert. And so I'm pretty fascinated by chess right now and how technology interrelates with that.
Uma música.
Oh gosh, if my kids happen to listen to it, they will berate me for not saying. There's a song called Vaseline Machine Gun, which is purely instrumental and has nothing to do with Vaseline or machine gun, so don't worry. But every time they get in the car, I'm playing that song right now. It's by Leo Kottke, who's a genius. So
Oh, good. Esporte que você gosta ou pratica?
Soccer.
no, I have to say now, at the moment, I'm fascinated by tennis, and not on the first person, but second person, because both of my kids are super into tennis, and so we end up spending a lot of time watching and playing tennis with them. So that's the fun sport right now.
I know you study all the time, mas eu sempre pergunto aqui, estudo, algo of self-learning or formal course, something that you don't study usually.
Isn't it fun that we get to learn stuff all the time? I think that's just fascinating. And, part of my job as a professor is I teach a class of machine learning that changes constantly. And so whether I want to or not, I have to constantly. Sometimes I'm jealous of other professors who can use the same slides from last semester, but I end up having to change them all the time. So there's some of that, but then there's so many opportunities now to learn. If you think about the access to materials that we have we mentioned Duolingo before. You can at practically no cost learn kind of whatever you happen to be curious about. Wikipedia. I've done a bunch of research on how people use Wikipedia. It is a fascinating resource that is just available. Or things like Khan Academy and things. The opportunities for learning are just amazing. And I think the harder problem is figuring out where to spend your time. You can spend a lot of time chasing all these different things and not get your day job done. So anyway.
All right. We usually ask about something in Brazil that people love. Nós sempre perguntamos sobre uma brasilidade que as pessoas escolhem. But to Sam, I don't know if he wants to choose something
Pessoa
Brasília,
perfeita para falar sobre isso. É com ele que a gente tem que perguntar isso.
something from Brazil and something from America that you love.
I think that you're setting me up to say, the people in Brazil that I've met. So I have to. We've done nothing but eat since we've been here too. So it's
But
pretty
good food.
Yes, it's been quite delicious. I gotta say, a negative is the traffic. We've spent a lot of time in traffic too. So
And in America.
there's so many fascinating things in America right now.
Brazil only one.
Exactly.
In America.
Well, I have a lot more experience with America right now.
Choose one.
Choose one. Oh gosh, you put me on the spot here.
And you can choose one from Vienna as well, if you want to.
Oh gosh, that's a lot of pressure. I think the thing that I would choose about America, and it's not fair because I know that's so much better than just a short time here, but the ability, I think, to do things. You can do things. You can explore. You can learn. And maybe those opportunities are here, and I don't know about them, but the opportunities are there to learn and to do things in a way that is just limited by your appetite and your interest. And I know that's I'm speaking from my nice world in America, but there are so many opportunities for many people. Not everyone.
Less barriers, less boundaries.
Less boundaries, yeah. I mean,
It's not
it's
the
not
same in
perfect.
Brazil.
It's not perfect, and it's not it's not evenly socioeconomically distributed. But for many people, there are many opportunities and low barriers.
And Vienna?
Vienna is just coffee. It's just good coffee.
Good. A person you want, not Sam Altman, but a person that you want to interview, not yet, you haven't interviewed and want to interview in your podcast.
Yeah, I feel like I have very limited opportunities to shout out and try to get someone on the podcast, and maybe I should use Taylor Swift as my example, just to broaden the reach of our podcast here. But maybe let me switch the question a little bit. The question tends to gravitate towards these people who are technologists, who are makers and producers of technology. I'm a little more fascinated right now with the people who are the users of technology, which is not quite the same like signature name as it is sort of all of us. I'd really like to talk to people who have used these technologies to solve some good problems. Not that they're not selling technology, but they're using the technology to solve problems like urban design is a huge problem, or any of the ESG problems. People that are making progress on that. And I'll go back to the World Wildlife episode that we did on the podcast. Those people are using the technology in ways that I never dreamed that they were using those technologies. And those are fascinating for me in a way that, maybe Dave Tall from World Wildlife Fund doesn't quite have the name recognition of Taylor Swift or Sam Altman. He does have an ant named after him, which I thought was pretty fascinating. So there's a type of ant that is named after the World Wildlife Fund, the person that we talked to. But these are the people I think that are interesting. They're using these technologies, not necessarily producing these technologies. And those tend to be less famous, but maybe more relatable to me.
Last but not least, uma frase, one quote, ou uma palavra que te inspira.
Ooh, learn. It has to be learn in the world right now, doesn't it? I mean, there's so much going on with both machine learning and us learning. Learning just seems like a big deal. And certainly when my role as a professor and what you are interested at MIT Sloan Management Review in Brazil, it's about knowledge and learning. And that's really, really interesting in our economy of ideas. That's the fascinating thing. So I'll pick one word is learn.
Best answer ever.
Oh,
Eu ia falar isso porque é uma palavra que nos representa também, né, Adri? Pessoalmente,
Representa.
That word represents us.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's perfect.
And it's important.
And com essa palavra, né, a gente gostaria de terminar aqui o nosso podcast, mas lógico, a gente não vai terminar sem antes agradecer muito ao Sam. Thanks a lot, Sam, por ter estado aqui conosco hoje. Um prazer ao vivo aqui, a gente pertinho um do outro. Thanks a lot for being with us. Adriana Salles Gomes também, muito obrigada. Obrigada também a toda essa equipe, todos aqui de amarelinho, aqui gravando. Não sei o nome de todo mundo, mas obrigada por vocês estarem aqui e poderem ajudar isso aqui tudo a acontecer.
A gente tem que ver se a gente ficar bonita e a gente agradece bastante. Se a gente ficar mais ou menos...
Não, a gente vai, os três aqui, todos muito bonitos. Muito obrigada a você também pela audiência. Não esqueça que vocês podem também ver todos os episódios aqui de O Futuro Vem do Futuro no portal de MIT Sloan Management Review Brasil. E a gente te convida também a acompanhar nossa newsletter Extended. Nos vemos na próxima quinta-feira. Até lá!